Alright, in this video we're going to be talking about flowing, which is a way of taking notes during a debate in order to create your counter-arguments and your conclusion. So to start off with, I'm going to take my piece of paper and write the resolution at the top, just so I can keep in mind which debate this is for, in case I need to keep the notes for later. After I write that resolution at the top, I'm going to divide the page into 3 columns. You're going to want 2 pages when you do flowing, one to keep track of the affirmative argument, one to keep track of the negative. If I'm keeping track of the affirmative argument, I'm going to write open affirmative in the first column, cross negative, and then rebuttal for affirmative. Starting out with the affirmative, here's what I could write down if their argument sounded like this. Romeo and Juliet is the best Shakespeare play because it combines universal themes, emotional impact, and lasting cultural influence. The play explores love, fate, family conflict, and youth, ideas that remain relevant to audiences of all ages. These are accessible ideas. Shakespeare's poetic language, especially in the balcony scene, is some of his more memorable writing. Additionally, the tragic ending leaves a powerful message about the consequences of hatred and impulsive decisions. Because it is accessible, emotionally powerful, and widely influential, Romeo and Juliet stands above Shakespeare's other works. You'll notice that as the speech was being said, I was both listening and writing at the same time. I was writing down the main points of the argument, and in your debates, there's probably going to be a lot more said than what was in that little explanation. But this is a simple way to keep track of what's said. I'm just giving you a shorter example. So now you're going to go into your argument that you just wrote down from the other team, and you're going to pick out the key points that you want to attack. Once you pick those out, you're going to go into your cross-examination column and start coming up with questions for them. This will be during your work time in between the speeches. And at this time, you should have one partner coming up with questions and the other partner doing research so that you have statistics to back up what you're saying. A cross-examination written in this way could sound like this. In your opening statement, you said that Romeo and Juliet is the best because it is accessible. Do you believe accessibility should matter more than depth when evaluating literature? And what evidence is there that the balcony scene is memorable? And why does memorability make the play great? I can recall several plays that I have seen that were very memorable, but that's because they were awful. You mentioned that the play is emotionally impactful. However, aren't there other Shakespeare plays that are possibly even more emotionally impactful? For example, the death of Ophelia in Hamlet has had such an emotional impact that it still has an impact on today's society. For example, the Lumineers' song, Ophelia. And lastly, isn't it true that Romeo and Juliet's actions were rushed and unrealistic? After all, we see them fall in love in a matter of seconds, right after Romeo was seen professing his love for Rosaline. Then, rather than waiting to see if something might change, Romeo killed himself immediately upon discovering Juliet's apparent death. These are actions that logically thinking people would not take. Do you think that we should look up to these as moral? Now the third column is where you're going to be writing down the affirmative's rebuttal. You're going to connect them to the questions that you asked. So for example, this is what the affirmative's rebuttal may sound like. To answer your question, there are other plays that are very emotionally impactful, yes, but Romeo and Juliet is the clearest of them. That is why it is most often the first Shakespeare play taught to students. You question if Romeo and Juliet's actions are rushed and unrealistic. I would argue that they are rushed, but not quite unrealistic. They are being used to strengthen the play's message about impulsivity and the consequences of it. And you asked if accessibility matters more than depth when evaluating literature. Accessibility matters because it allows people to engage with Shakespeare's ideas. If they do not answer one of your questions, make sure that you make note of that as well. Write that they conceded it. Now you're going to go to your next piece of paper and you're going to write down your own argument. So, the opening statement for negative may sound something like this. While Romeo and Juliet is popular, it is not Shakespeare's best play. Other works such as Hamlet and Macbeth show greater complexity in character development and themes. Romeo and Juliet make impulsive decisions, which can make them less relatable or admirable. In contrast, plays like Hamlet explores deeper psychological struggles and moral dilemmas. Popularity does not equal quality, and Shakespeare's later tragedies demonstrate stronger storytelling and more mature ideas.
You can write all of this down before you actually get into your debates, so that you can have this all prepped and ready to go once you get up and start working on the rest of your flow. But we're doing this for our debates as well, because when it comes time for the summary at the end of the debate, this will be very helpful to have written down everything that you said, that your opponent said, and that you responded with. Now we're going to go into the cross-examination for affirmative. So you would have this written down as they are cross-examining you, and you're just going to take note of what they said. So you might have something like, you mentioned Hamlet has more complex characters. Do you agree that complexity can make a play harder for audiences to understand? You stated that Romeo and Juliet's impulsiveness makes them less admirable. Isn't Shakespeare intentionally showing how youth and family conflict can lead to tragedy? In your opening statement, you argued that Hamlet and Macbeth are better because they are more complex. Can you explain why complexity automatically makes a play better than one that is emotionally powerful and widely understood? And you claims that popularity does not equal equality. However, isn't the fact that Romeo and Juliet has remained popular for over 400 years evidence of its lasting value? And you just want to make sure that you get all of these things written down so that you know what you have to respond to in your rebuttal. So you have all of the questions written out, and during your work time before the rebuttal, you can make sure that you have a response for each of them. Now we're going to go into rebuttals negative. So for this, you would write it down before you actually get to speaking it. You would write it down during your work time and during the affirmatives cross-examination. And then you would just read off your notes as you get to the rebuttal. So it might sound something like this. Increasing the complexity of a script may make it harder for audiences to understand, but complexity also makes a play more meaningful and rewarding once it has been figured out. Shakespeare may be purposefully showing that youth and impulse lead to tragedy, but he addresses this in many other shows. Hamlet has a similar message, and it portrays that message with even greater complexity. Complexity makes a play better than one that is more widely understood because it explores deeper themes and creates richer characters, which shows greater literary skill in both the writer and the reader. And the steadfast popularity of Romeo and Juliet shows cultural impact, but not necessarily that it is Shakespeare's strongest writing. I, for one, have seen many very popular shows that are popular because they are awful. And now we come to the conclusion where we're summarizing the debate. You're going to take answers from the rebuttals and put them in your conclusion. So, for example, complexity is more meaningful for audience members who want to be challenged. That's from the rebuttal of negative. Then sure, Romeo and Juliet is more accessible, but the complexity of other plays can be understood with the assistance of explanation. That's from the rebuttal of affirmative. The themes in Shakespeare that our opponents brought up were youth and impulse, but these themes can be seen in other Shakespeare plays, such as A Midsummer Night's Dream. That's from the rebuttal of negative. Along with these themes, Shakespeare's other shows feature much more complex characters, showing his greater literary skills that Romeo and Juliet does not show. Cultural impact of the scripts does not prove that it is better writing than the others, and that's once again from negative's rebuttal. Then we get into most of what the affirmative's rebuttal pulled up. The affirmative side did not respond to our question about the evidence proving that the balcony scenes are more memorable, which means that they have conceded that that point is incorrect. Our opponents also never provided any evidence in support of the point that Romeo and Juliet is clear in its emotional impact. So this is where you're taking things that they didn't answer and you are weaponizing them, proving that affirmative does not know their point. Then you're going to wrap it up with a good conclusion. We assert that Romeo and Juliet is not the best Shakespeare play because of the character's impulsivity, underdeveloped themes, and the lack of the literary skills used. For these reasons, you should negate.